First, I'm going to install the NVMe SSD and removing this heat shield. Take off this protective tape so you can put the heatsink right against your SSD. I'm making this build so I can have a dual boot Windows 10 and Mojave, and I intend to use it for Final Cut. So next we're installing the CPU, the i7-8700K, 6 cores, hyper-threading, turbo boost, all that stuff. Make sure when you're installing you have the CPU arrow lined up with the arrow on the socket on your motherboard. Leave that socket cover on when you're installing. And drop it in there. As you can see, it's going to take a little bit of pressure to push down on there. And then the cap will snap off. You can put that in your box. You'll need that if you have any warranty issues. Next, installing the RAM. I got one 16 gig stick for now. I was trying to keep it under $1,000 build, so I'll get another 16 gig at some point. I got this one off of Amazon. Now I'm going to install the motherboard into the case. So line up your motherboard with your case. It's going to have a bunch of offset screws for different size motherboards, so count them up like I'm doing here and line them up so you can make sure you have only the standoffs that are for your motherboard type, and take out any other ones that could short out your motherboard if you have an extra one touching a piece of metal somewhere. This Corsair mid-tower case came with some screws and zip tie for the wires and the screws for the hard drives and stuff, so I'll just get that out of the way before we get the motherboard in there. Now I'm installing the motherboard. It's an Asus Maximus 10 Hero. Really good value for the price, for what it does. One thing I didn't like is the I/O plate I couldn't take off, and the right side, the right edge was rounded, so I couldn't really get the holes lined up with the bottom. So I had to end up prying the bottom right corner to kind of get it to stick out of the edge of the case. I didn't want to cut it or anything, so you can see right there I'm just trying to push on the back edge there without putting too much pressure. As you can see, it is a pain to get it into this case at least. But yeah, just keep working with it. Don't try to pry too hard. Just get it so where you can kind of jam it in there so there's not too much pressure on the screws on the inside where the motherboard is, where it screws down to the case. Next up is installing the Corsair RM750X power supply. This should be pretty straightforward. Just put the fan inside or outside in the case depending on what you have in there. Like this one has a dust filter, so I'm gonna aim the fan up and draw air in from the bottom. Depends on how you have your fan set up and what you're gonna put in there. And here's a bag of zip ties for all the cables when you put them in. Next, I'm going to install the heatsink, the Noctua NHD15S. Pretty big fan and highly rated to keep the temperatures down compared to liquid cooling. It's pretty close. I didn't want to have to replace a liquid cooler every couple years, so trying this one out. This is the cooler backplate. Just make sure you line it up right on the back of the motherboard. Now here's the mounting brackets and the screws. See which way you want your fan to go, and check the screws on the bottom of your heatsink so you can set your brackets up the right way for your thumb screws. You see what I mean? You can screw down in the middle of that bracket, so just make sure your fan is orientated right and the holes are in the right spot. I used Arctic Silver. I didn't use the Noctua brand. I've never had a problem with Arctic Silver, and I put a little bit more than the size of a pea on there. And I've built quite a few computers and never had any CPU overheating issues with that amount of paste and using Arctic Silver. So I removed the fan just so I can screw this heatsink in easier. And like I said before, you see where you can screw in on the bracket on the bottom of the heatsink there, so just make sure you put those in the right way. After I put the fan back in, route your wire to the nearest fan power pins and plug it in. Now it's time to install the video card. I got this Sapphire Nitro Radeon RX 580. Because I heard it was plug and play with the Mojave, and you can use two of them. So I wanted to see how the one worked with the exporting on Final Cut, and probably get another one to speed those times up. For cable management, I usually try to get everything plugged in, and then I'll clean it up afterwards. Check your motherboard manual to see where you can plug in all the case cables, and to have your layout to see where all your other power goes to. And this is the front chassis fan. Just reroute the wire to your closest chassis power. Check your motherboard manual. This is the Fenvi FV-T919 Wi-Fi Bluetooth card. This is plug and play. I don't have to do anything to make it work with handoff, AirDrop, or Wi-Fi. Now for this card to work, you need to connect a Bluetooth cable to a USB. I believe it only works in a USB 2.0 slot, but I get pretty decent speeds doing AirDrop. Now I'm gonna prep for installing the top exhaust fan. Make sure your grommets line up for whatever size fan that you're putting up there. And make sure you have it orientated the way that you want the air to go. So I have mine with the exhaust going straight out and not drawing air in. And I should have installed this beforehand, but it did not come in the mail until after I started the build. Now it's time to route it to an open fan power. Take a look at your motherboard for an open slot, or look at your motherboard manual to find another fan slot. Now I'm hooking up the power supply cables. This is modular, so I'm going to look at what cables I need to install for however many devices I have that need power.
you.